welcome to your Daily 5 for Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. You may have seen the news that YouTube is rolling out a new requirement area for content creators when they upload video to the site. Well, I guess upload anything to the site. I don't know if it technically can be defined as video, but whatever you upload to YouTube, there is now a new question that comes up, which is really what most people are saying concerns the upcoming elections and generative imagery. So this is defined as altered content, which honestly I think is a terrible name for this, and legally that's a really, well, we'll get into it, but that's a really bad title for this. But YouTube is calling it altered content, and when you select that, or when you look at that, there's 3 bullet points that YouTube lays out for what altered content is. Let's go through them. The first one is, makes a real person appear to say or do something they didn't say or do. Now I'm reading this right from YouTube's little imagery here. The second one is, and this is the important one, alters footage of a real event or place. Keep that one in mind. That's the one I'm really concerned with. And the final one is generates a realistic looking scene that didn't actually occur. Now to me, that is somewhat related to the second bullet point, but makes a key distinction. And the reason the second bullet point is the most fascinating one to me is because it is basically saying, because it uses the word alter. And this is where I think there are going to be a lot of interesting legal questions is over the word alteration. Because what most people, when they look at this, they think of as, oh, they're talking about all these new ChatGPT tools and all this stuff that just generates material, imagery, whatever, out of the stuff that's being ingested from all over. And that's why a lot of artists and other creatives are upset about it. And that's one side of it. But the alteration thing, that's a very specific angle because depending on how this is legally interpreted, that could mean a whole lot more than just machine-generated imagery. And I think people aren't really considering that because if you've used Photoshop for a while, you may remember that, I don't even know how many years ago, they introduced something called content-aware fill. Now, there's a different type of fill that was recently introduced, which is called generative fill. That one does rely on machine-generated imagery, their Firefly model and Adobe stock, depending on what you put in there. But it is sampling other sources of imagery. That's generative fill. But content-aware fill never leaves the image that you have in there. So let's say you have a photo and a nice family out in the field one day and there's a swarm of, flies or bugs off to the right that just doesn't look good. You want to get rid of it. With content-aware fill, you select that and it will try to get rid of it and often does a very good job. And what it's doing is it's sampling the rest of the image that you loaded, your image, not anywhere else, not leaving Photoshop, not leaving your local device, not using Firefly or anything else as far as I understand it. And I've read a couple different articles. They all say the same thing. So I'm going by that. It never leaves that image. Therefore, that is not a generated image, but it is altered content. And the problem here is the way this is worded, it conflates the two things. Now, don't get me wrong. It is worth knowing if somebody altered an image, but they're lumping this into the same bucket as generated imagery. And there is a difference there. Because it's one thing to erase something from a background, it's another to generate something that never existed in that background. You may say, well, what's the distinction? Well, the distinction becomes important if we're getting into legality and what is actionable and what is actually deceitful and what is perhaps just corrective. If somebody had, let's say, a breakout on one side of their face and they change it, and now it has to be labeled as altered content. If you don't have the context, will that be identified as some kind of malicious or deceptive material when it's really just somebody who doesn't want to look that bad in a photo? Again, I'm not saying that I see any direct problem with this that I can identify right now, but I don't really think that lumping these two things together is as informative as it should be. And so I'm curious where we end up with this type of stuff a few years from now. Forget the election. I mean, the election's going to be its own set of problems. But the way these things are being defined, I think we're going to have more distinction here, more context, more of a granular identification of what's going on. Because again, just saying the word alter, literally, if all you do is, if you change the saturation on a photo, you've altered it. But that's not the same as generating a person out of whole cloth or changing what somebody actually said. So putting those two things together, I feel like this approach is not going to work in the long term because it just seems like we're mixing everything together when there are levels of distinction. But read this Ars Technica article and I'd be curious. Are you concerned about this? Am I overblowing this? You let me know. Later.